I have no money, the father begged. The mafia boss pointed at a single mom instead. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. Michael Thompson had been running from his past for years. A man once well regarded in his small town, his fall from grace had been as quick as it was dramatic. It wasn't that Michael didn't love his daughter Emily, or that he was a bad father. He simply couldn't escape the debt that had been accumulating over the years. His gambling, his bad choices, all seemed to pile on top of him, until the weight became unbearable. He sat in his small, dimly lit apartment, wringing his hands together, staring at the phone in front of him. The Mafia had come for him once before, and now they were back. This time, they wouldn't leave without getting something substantial. His thoughts raced as he prepared for the worst. Desperation clawed at him. I have no money, he mumbled to himself. I can't pay them. I can't let them hurt my family. The sound of his own words hung in the air, an ominous reminder of the hole he had dug for himself. His daughter Emily, a single mother struggling to make ends meet, was his only family. He had promised her a better life, but in truth, he had done little to deliver on that promise. But Michael's world was about to change in a way he never expected. The knock on the door startled him, and before he could react, the door burst open. In walked two men, tall, dressed in dark suits, with cold, calculating eyes. They didn't say a word as they walked past him, scanning the room with professional detachment. Then, there was the third man. Dominic Rossi, the Mafia boss. His presence filled the room immediately, as if the very air around him thickened. Dominic was not a man who needed to announce his arrival. His power spoke for him. He was tall, his features sharp, his dark eyes scanning Michael with a knowing intensity. Michael Thompson, he said coolly, his voice calm but carrying an unspoken threat. I hear you've been having trouble paying your debts. Michael's throat went dry as he nodded. He had no idea how long he could keep this charade going. I don't have the money, Michael stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. I've lost it all. I can't pay you back. The Mafia boss regarded him for a moment, then turned toward the door. Bring her in, he said, and Michael's heart skipped a beat. He could already feel the shift in the air. Emily walked into the room, her eyes wide with confusion, her face pale. She had no idea what her father was involved in, what kind of world he had dragged them both into. Dad? She asked, her voice trembling. Michael stood frozen, unable to speak. The Mafia boss stepped toward her, his dark eyes scanning her, as if he could see straight through her. She'll do, Dominic said, his tone dismissive. Your daughter instead of the money. Emily recoiled, her eyes flickering between her father and the Mafia boss. She didn't understand. What are you talking about? She asked, her voice rising. What is he saying, Dad? Dominic took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. Your father owes me, he said, his voice calm, but filled with authority. And now, I'm taking you instead of the money. Emily's world collapsed in that moment. No, she gasped, stepping backward. I'm not part of this. I don't even know who you are. Dominic's eyes flickered with amusement. You'll learn soon enough. Michael looked at his daughter, his heart breaking. He had no choice. This was his mess, and now she was going to pay for it. He had no money, no way out, and he couldn't let the Mafia destroy what little was left of his family. The Mafia boss turned to his men and nodded. Without another word, they grabbed Emily and began to lead her out of the apartment. Michael tried to stop them, but they were too strong, too powerful. Dad, Emily shouted as they dragged her away. Help me, but it was already too late. Dominic watched as the men took her, his expression unreadable. You've got one chance, Michael, he said, turning back to the broken man. Don't disappoint me. Emily was still trying to process everything as the heavy door of the Mafia boss's mansion closed behind her. The sound of it echoed in her mind, a finality that weighed down on her chest. She had never imagined her life would take such a turn. One moment, she was simply trying to survive as a single mother, working multiple jobs to make ends meet, and now, she was standing in a cold, luxurious hallway, surrounded by men who spoke little but watched her closely. Her heart raced. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The man who had taken her, Dominic Rossi, was no ordinary person. She had seen the way the other guests at the gala had stepped aside for him, how his presence demanded attention and respect. It wasn't just his wealth that commanded power, but something deeper, something more dangerous. As they walked further into the mansion, the opulence of her surroundings was overwhelming. The marble floors gleamed under the dim chandelier light, and the paintings on the walls looked like they belonged in a museum, not in a private home. Emily could feel her knees tremble slightly as they led her to a grand living room. The men who accompanied her seemed to be everywhere, moving with a quiet confidence that made it clear they were used to controlling every situation. Dominic stopped at the center of the room and turned to face her. His eyes, dark and cold, studied her without a hint of emotion. "You can sit," he said, his voice low and commanding. She didn't move. Instead, she stood there, her fists clenched at her sides, trying to keep herself composed. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound strong. "Your father's debts need to be paid," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "But instead of money, I've decided you'll be my compensation." The words hit her like a slap. Compensation. She was nothing more than a pawn in a game she didn't even understand. She opened her mouth to protest, but nothing came out. "I'm not staying here," she finally managed, her voice weak but determined. Dominic raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a faint smile. "You don't have a choice, Emily. You belong to me now, and whether you like it or not, your life is no longer just your own." The words were harsh, but there was an odd sense of finality in them, as if he was simply stating a fact. Emily felt her heart beat faster as the weight of his words settled in. There was no way out, no way to escape. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost desperate. Dominic's expression softened just the tiniest bit, though it was still filled with authority. "Because you're the only way I can get back what's owed to me. Your father failed to keep his promises, but you—" He trailed off, his gaze scanning her face. "You'll be a reminder of his debt, and more importantly, a way to ensure he pays it back." Emily felt sick. She had always known her father's actions would catch up with him eventually, but she never imagined it would happen like this. She never imagined she would be dragged into a world of danger and power, where money and threats controlled everything. As the evening wore on, she couldn't help but wonder just how much more she would have to endure. She had no idea what was in store for her, but the thought of being under Dominic's control filled her with dread. And yet, as much as she hated the idea of being part of his world, she couldn't deny that there was something captivating about him. Something that made her feel both afraid and strangely drawn to him. She had no choice but to play along, at least for now. But the question remained, would she ever be able to escape this man, this world, and return to the life she had before? Only time would tell. As the days passed, Emily found herself trapped in a world that was foreign, dangerous, and unyielding. The mansion that Dominic Rossi called home was both a gilded cage and a fortress. Each room she was shown felt colder, more isolating, as if the walls themselves were closing in around her. She had been given a room, one that was far too luxurious for someone like her, but it felt empty, void of any comfort. The soft, luxurious bed, the beautiful furniture, it all seemed so distant from the reality she had known. It was a reminder of everything she had lost. She wasn't sure what Dominic wanted from her, or what he expected, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life had been irrevocably altered. Each time she tried to leave, each time she reached for the door, there were always eyes on her. His men watched her every move, as if they were guarding her, but in truth, they were ensuring that she stayed in line. Dominic rarely spoke to her directly, but when he did, his words were calm, measured, and always with the weight of authority behind them. His presence was overwhelming, his gaze calculated, and Emily couldn't help but feel that she was a piece in a much larger game. Despite the coldness of the mansion, there were moments when Emily could feel Dominic's eyes on her, moments where his gaze lingered longer than she was comfortable with. Yet, when he spoke to her, it was always with a detached politeness that masked the power he held. "You are here because your father owes me," he would remind her, his voice low, but carrying a tone that was both final and unsettling. Those words haunted her, echoed in her mind long after he had said them. She had heard them countless times, but each time, they carried a weight she couldn't shake off. The days blended together, each one indistinguishable from the next. But there was something else, something she couldn't ignore. Something about Dominic Rossi pulled at her. There was a coldness in him, a wall that he never let down, but in moments when he looked at her, there was something else. A flicker of something that she couldn't understand. Was it concern? Or was it simply a part of his strategy to control her? Emily didn't know, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. She had no family left, no friends. Dominic had ensured that she was isolated, keeping her away from the outside world. She was cut off, and she was starting to feel it. But with that isolation came something else, an unsettling sense of security. As much as she hated being in his grasp, as much as she wanted to escape, part of her started to realize that this world, dangerous as it was also protective. It was twisted, but there was a strange sense of order in it. Dominic had warned her that she didn't have a choice, that she belonged to him now. But what did that even mean? She didn't know. What she did know was that her father's death had changed everything, and in a way, it had tied her fate to Dominic's. She had to play along, at least for now. But Emily wasn't stupid. She could see the cracks in the walls. She could see how the people around Dominic behaved, how they feared him, respected him, but also how they avoided his wrath at all costs. There was power in that, and though she hated every moment of it, she couldn't help but wonder what it would feel like to be on the other side of it. Could she ever escape him? Would she be able to break free from this life? She wasn't sure, but she knew one thing. Dominic Rossi wasn't someone who would let her go easily. Days passed in a blur, and Emily found herself slowly becoming accustomed to the strange, suffocating rhythm of life in Dominic Rossi's world. Each morning began the same, with the soft rustling of sheets as the mansion's early morning light filtered through the tall windows. The house, although magnificent, always felt empty, and the silence was overwhelming. She would wake up, dress, and follow the daily routine set for her by his men. It wasn't much different from the life she had been living before, always working, always pushing through the exhaustion, but now it felt far more like a trap. Every moment was monitored, every move observed. Even when she ventured into the garden, his men watched from the shadows. She was never alone. As much as she resented it, she couldn't escape the fact that she had a roof over her head, a place to sleep, food to eat. The world outside the gates, the life she once knew, seemed farther and farther away with each passing day. The power of Dominic's influence was undeniable. His presence loomed over everything. His voice, though rarely heard, still echoed in her mind. The words he had spoken to her the night she was brought here, "You belong to me now," repeated themselves in her thoughts, a constant reminder of the reality she had been forced into. She hated that she was bound to him in this way, but a part of her began to wonder if there was more to him than the ruthless businessman she had first seen. She saw the way he interacted with his people, calm, controlled, but with a weight of authority that demanded respect. And yet, there was something about him, something hidden behind his cold exterior that she couldn't quite place. The more she observed him, the more she saw that he wasn't entirely the monster she had imagined. There were small moments, fleeting instances where his demeanor softened, where his gaze lingered on her just a little too long. She caught a glimpse of it once, when he looked at her while she was tending to the garden. For a moment, there was a look in his eyes that wasn't just the cold calculation of a mafia boss. It was something more human, something she couldn't quite understand. But those moments were rare, and Emily knew better than to let herself be fooled. He still held all the power, and she had none. One afternoon, as she sat in the library, trying to focus on a book to distract herself from the constant tension in her chest, Dominic entered the room. She could feel the change in the air the moment he stepped through the door. His presence was commanding, filling the space as if he owned it, which, in many ways, he did. "Emily," he said, his voice as calm as always, but with a touch of something else. "You've been here for a while now, and yet I still don't understand you." She looked up at him, her heart skipping a beat. "I'm not here to explain myself to you," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. She hated how easily her emotions betrayed her, how the sight of him made her feel vulnerable. He raised an eyebrow, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You think I don't know what you're doing?" he asked. trying to escape, trying to keep your distance. But you can't hide from me, Emily. You can't hide from what you've become. His words hit her harder than she expected. She wasn't sure if he was referring to her situation or something deeper, but she wasn't about to let him see how much his words affected her. I'm not hiding from anything, she said, standing up. I'm just trying to survive. Dominic's gaze softened for a moment, but then he stepped closer, his presence overwhelming her. Surviving is not the same as living, he said, his voice low. You've got to stop thinking of this as a prison, Emily. You have more freedom here than you think. Emily wanted to argue, to scream at him for everything he had taken from her. But instead, she stood in silence, her eyes locked on his. For a brief moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something like regret, or perhaps a deeper understanding. But it was gone as quickly as it came. Think about it, he said, his voice barely a whisper. You're here because I chose to protect you. Not everyone gets that chance. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Emily standing alone in the room. The weight of his words hung in the air, lingering long after he was gone. She wanted to believe him, to trust that there was some truth in what he said, but the part of her that was still fiercely independent and free could not let go of the resentment that had taken root in her heart. She had been brought here as payment, as collateral for her father's debts. She wasn't sure if she could ever see herself as anything more than that to Dominic Rossi. She wasn't sure if she even wanted to. But the longer she stayed in his world, the more she wondered, was it possible to live in a world built on power and control, yet still find a way to keep a part of herself intact? The days stretched on, and Emily found herself slowly getting accustomed to the strange, suffocating rhythm of life in Dominic Rossi's world. The mansion, with its grand architecture and towering walls, had begun to feel more like a maze with no escape. She woke up every day to the same emptiness, the same cold silence that seemed to follow her wherever she went. The walls were adorned with expensive art, the floors gleamed with polished marble, but it all felt so distant, so hollow. She had never imagined that her life would come to this, being trapped in a world of power and wealth that she didn't belong to, where she had no control over her own future. As she walked through the halls of the mansion, she couldn't help but wonder what her life had become. She was no longer in control. Her father's debt had taken everything from her, and now she was left to play a part in a world she didn't understand. Dominic's presence was constant, lurking in the background, his eyes always watching, calculating. He rarely spoke to her unless it was necessary, but there were moments when she could feel his gaze, heavy and penetrating, as if he was studying her, trying to understand her. He had warned her when she first arrived that she belonged to him now. At first, she thought it was just a figure of speech, a way for him to assert his dominance over her. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that it wasn't just a statement, it was a fact. She had become a pawn in his world, and no matter how hard she tried to fight it, there was no escaping it. Her father's mistakes had led her here, and now there was nothing left for her but to accept the consequences. Emily hated the feeling of helplessness that washed over her every time she entered a room and saw Dominic standing there, his cold, calculating gaze locked on her. But there was something else, something she couldn't quite understand. There were moments when she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, something that wasn't just cold indifference, but something deeper, more complex. It was as if he was waiting for her to make a move, waiting for her to break through the walls she had built around herself. But Emily wasn't sure if she was ready for that. She didn't know if she could trust him, if she could ever trust anyone again. Her world had been shattered by her father's actions, and Dominic was a constant reminder of how far she had fallen. One evening, as she sat in the library, flipping through a book that she barely even registered, Dominic entered the room. She hadn't heard him approach, but his presence was undeniable. She looked up, meeting his eyes, and for a moment, the world outside seemed to fade away. "Emily," he said, his voice calm but carrying a weight she couldn't ignore. "Do you ever wonder why you're here?" She stiffened, her hands gripping the book in front of her. She wasn't sure if she was ready to answer that question. "I'm here because of my father," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Dominic nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Yes, but it's more than that, isn't it?" he said. "You're here because you chose to stay." The word struck her like a lightning bolt. She hadn't thought of it that way before, but Dominic was right. She had stayed, even when she could have left, even when she could have fought harder to get out. She had accepted her fate, in a way, even though she didn't want to admit it. "I didn't choose this," Emily replied, her voice shaking with a mixture of frustration and anger. "I didn't choose any of this." Dominic stepped closer, his gaze softening just slightly. "But you're still here. And that means something," he said quietly. "You've learned to survive, Emily. And that's something most people can't do. But you've done it." Emily's heart pounded in her chest as his words sank in. She didn't know how to respond. She wasn't sure if she wanted to respond. There was something about the way he spoke to her, something in his tone that made her want to believe him, to trust him, but she couldn't. She wasn't ready to let go of the anger, the fear that had built up inside her. "I'm not your pawn, Dominic," she said, her voice low but determined. "I'm not going to be a part of your world. Not like this." Dominic didn't reply right away. He just stood there, studying her, as if he was weighing her words. "You're stronger than you think," he finally said. "And you'll see that in time." With that, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving Emily standing alone, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and conflicting emotions. What was she supposed to believe? What was she supposed to do? She had been dragged into a world she didn't understand, and now she had to figure out how to navigate it. The days stretched on, each one blurring into the next. Emily couldn't help but feel like she was running out of time. Her father's debt was looming over her, and she couldn't escape it. But there was something else, something she couldn't quite put her finger on, something that made her question everything she thought she knew about Dominic Rossi. Emily sat by the window in her room, staring out at the sprawling grounds of Dominic's estate. The weather had changed. The sky was overcast, the clouds heavy and thick with rain. The air felt thick, like a storm was coming, and not just in the sky. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, her mind replaying every moment, every word Dominic had said. "You've learned to survive," he had told her. Survive. That was what she had been doing for so long. Surviving, not living. And now, in this gilded cage, she had to keep surviving, trapped in a world where everything was decided for her. She ran her fingers along the edge of the window, the cold glass sending a chill through her fingertips. The estate was beautiful, yes, but it felt empty. There were no true connections here. No friends, no family, no comfort. Just the weight of expectation and power. As the days went by, Emily found herself pulled in two directions. On one hand, she despised everything about this life. The control, the constant surveillance, the way she had been forced into it all. On the other hand, there was something else, something she didn't want to admit. Dominic. He had a way of making her feel seen, even when she was just another pawn in his world. When he spoke to her, when he looked at her, there was something in his eyes. Something that wasn't just cold indifference. She couldn't figure it out, but it made her feel both comforted and terrified at the same time. One afternoon, as she was sitting in the library, trying to push away the thoughts that clouded her mind, Dominic entered the room. His presence, as always, was commanding. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, watching her. She looked up at him, her heart suddenly racing, her palms becoming sweaty. "You're quiet today," he said, his voice smooth and steady, yet laced with something she couldn't quite place. Emily wasn't sure how to respond. "Just thinking," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's eyes narrowed slightly, studying her as if trying to figure out exactly what was going on in her mind. He stepped closer, his movements graceful and confident. "You don't need to think too much," he said. "You're safe here." Safe. The word hung in the air between them, but Emily didn't feel safe. Not really. The more she stayed here, the more she realized that safety wasn't something she would find here, not in a world where power ruled everything. "I'm not sure what to believe anymore," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "Everything feels like a lie." Dominic paused, his gaze softening just a fraction. "It's not a lie," he said, his voice low. "You belong here. You just need to trust that." Trust. The word made her stomach turn. Trusting Dominic Rossi was a dangerous proposition, but a part of her couldn't help but wonder if there was more to him than the cold, calculating man she had first met. She had seen glimpses of something else, something deeper, but she wasn't sure if she could ever get past the walls he had built around himself. "I don't want to be a part of this world," Emily said, her voice stronger now. "I didn't ask for this." Dominic's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. No one asks for this, Emily, he said softly. But sometimes, we don't get to choose. There was something in the way he said it that made Emily pause. She had always thought she was a victim in all of this, forced into a life she didn't want. But what if she had more power in this situation than she realized? What if there was a way for her to take control of her fate, even in this twisted world Dominic had brought her into? What if I don't want to stay? She asked, her voice steady but her heart pounding. Dominic took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. Then you'll leave, he said, his voice a mere whisper. But you won't escape me. Not really. Emily's breath caught in her throat. His words sent a chill down her spine. But there was something else too, a sense of finality in them, as if he knew something she didn't. She couldn't help but feel the weight of his words. What did he mean by that? Could she ever truly escape this world, or was she bound to it, bound to him, forever? She didn't know the answer, but one thing was clear, her time in this world was far from over. Whether she liked it or not, Dominic Rossi had a hold on her, and she wasn't sure if she would ever be able to break free. The days continued to blend together for Emily, each one indistinguishable from the next, as she navigated the strange, suffocating world of Dominic Rossi's mansion. She had tried to keep her distance, to maintain some semblance of her old life, but it was impossible. The walls of the mansion felt like they were closing in on her, and she could feel herself growing more restless with each passing day. Every time she thought about leaving, about finding a way out, she was reminded that there was no escape. Dominic had made it clear that she was tied to him in some way, whether she liked it or not. And the more she resisted, the more she realized that she was being pulled deeper into his world. The mansion, with its polished floors and towering windows, felt like a prison, but it wasn't the physical walls that kept her here. It was the power Dominic held over her. She could sense it every time he entered the room, his presence filling the space in a way that left her feeling both captivated and trapped. She had tried to ignore him, to push him out of her thoughts, but it was impossible. There were moments when she caught him watching her, his eyes lingering on her just a little too long. And in those moments, she couldn't deny the strange pull she felt toward him, a pull that confused and frustrated her. She had always been independent, strong-willed, and yet, with Dominic, she found herself questioning everything she had ever known about herself. One evening, as Emily walked through the garden, the cool night air brushing against her skin, she saw him standing by the gate, his back to her. She hadn't expected to find him there, and for a moment, she wondered if he had been waiting for her. He turned when he heard her footsteps, his expression unreadable. "Emily," he said, his voice smooth and steady as always. "You've been avoiding me." She froze, her heart skipping a beat. She had been avoiding him, in every way she could. She didn't want to get close to him, didn't want to let herself feel anything for him. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the connection that seemed to grow stronger between them. "I haven't been avoiding you," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've just been busy." Dominic studied her for a moment, his gaze intense. "Busy," he repeated, almost as if testing the word on his tongue. "And yet, you still find time to be alone." Emily didn't know how to respond to that. She didn't want to admit that she was starting to feel something for him, something she didn't want to feel. She wasn't sure what it was, but it was there, lingering in the air between them. "What do you want from me, Dominic?" she asked, her voice quiet, almost as if she were afraid of the answer. He stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "What do I want?" he echoed, his voice soft, yet commanding. "I want you to understand, Emily. I want you to understand that this life, this world, is the only one I know. And you're a part of it now, whether you want to be or not." His words hit her like a wave, crashing over her with a force she hadn't expected. She had always thought she could fight it, that she could escape the life he had dragged her into. But in that moment, standing there in front of him, she realized that there was no way out. She was tied to him, bound by the choices she had made, the choices her father had made. "I don't belong here," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't belong in your world." Dominic's expression softened, just the slightest bit, as if he understood what she was feeling. "You may not belong here, Emily, but you're here now," he said quietly. "And that's the reality we both have to face." She wanted to argue, to scream at him that she didn't ask for this, that she didn't deserve to be trapped in his world. But the truth was, she didn't know what else to do. She was stuck, caught between the desire to escape and the strange pull she felt toward him. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her eyes lowering. Dominic reached out, his hand gently tilting her chin so she would look at him. "You don't have to do anything, Emily. Just be here. That's all I ask." His words were simple, yet they held an undeniable power. And in that moment, Emily realized that she was no longer in control. She was caught in his world, and there was nothing she could do to change that. The storm that had been building inside her finally broke, and she realized she didn't want to escape anymore. She didn't want to be alone, didn't want to live in constant fear of the unknown. She was trapped, yes, but she was also starting to understand something she hadn't before. She wasn't as powerless as she had thought. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way for her to find her place in this world. A way to live with the choices that had been made for her. And if that meant being with Dominic, then so be it. The road ahead wasn't clear, but for the first time since arriving at the mansion, Emily didn't feel completely alone. Emily spent the next few weeks in a strange state of detachment. The days passed like they always did, filled with silence, endless observations, and quiet conversations with Dominic when he was around. But her mind was a maze of conflicting emotions. She had accepted, on some level, that there was no way out of the world Dominic had dragged her into. She had tried to keep herself at a distance, to shield her heart from whatever pull she felt toward him, but the truth was undeniable. There were moments when she caught glimpses of a side of him that no one else saw. Moments when his facade of coldness cracked just enough for her to see something deeper, something more human. It unsettled her. Dominic was not just the powerful, controlling man who held her fate in his hands. There was something else. Something that made her question everything she thought she knew about him. Emily spent a lot of time thinking about her father. She hadn't seen him since the day he had handed her over to Dominic, and she couldn't help but wonder if he had ever really cared about her at all. It was a painful realization, but one she couldn't avoid. Dominic had given her a place in his world, and as much as she hated to admit it, she was starting to find a strange comfort in the routine of it all. She was safe here, at least in a way. She no longer had to worry about where her next meal would come from, or whether she would have a roof over her head. She had stability, something she hadn't had in a long time. But at what cost? One evening, as Emily walked through the grand hallway of the mansion, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw Dominic approaching. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in the way he moved that told her he wasn't just passing by. "We need to talk," he said, his voice calm but firm. Emily stopped in her tracks, her heart beating faster. "About what?" she asked, trying to keep the uncertainty out of her voice. Dominic's eyes searched hers, and for a moment, the usual coldness was absent. "About us," he said, his tone softer than usual. "I think it's time we had a real conversation." Emily felt a wave of unease wash over her. A real conversation? With him? "What's there to talk about?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You and I both know what this is. There's no need for any more pretending." Dominic took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "You think I don't see what's going on?" he asked. "You think I don't notice how you've been holding yourself back? How you've been pushing me away?" His words cut through her like a knife. She had tried so hard to keep her emotions in check, to keep her distance, but it wasn't working. She couldn't lie to him, not anymore. "I don't want to be here," she said, her voice trembling despite herself. "I didn't ask for this life. I didn't ask to be part of your world." Dominic's expression softened, but his eyes were still intense. "I never asked you to be a part of it, Emily," he said quietly. "But you are. And I think you've started to realize that." Emily didn't know what to say. She had never expected to feel like this, to be so conflicted about Dominic and the life he had forced upon her. There were moments when she hated him, when she wanted to scream at him for taking everything from her. But then there were other moments when she saw him in a different light, when she saw the man beneath the Mafia boss. She didn't know what to make of it. "I don't know what you want from me," she whispered. "I don't know if I can keep doing this." Dominic stepped even closer, and for the first time, she didn't step back. "I don't want anything from you, Emily," he said softly. "I just want you to stop fighting it. You've already become a part of this world, whether you like it or not. The question is, are you going to accept it, or are you going to keep running from it?" His words hung in the air between them, heavy and filled with a quiet urgency. Emily didn't know how to answer. She couldn't deny that something had shifted inside her, something that was making her question everything. But she also couldn't ignore the fear that clung to her, the fear that she was losing herself in a world she didn't want to be a part of. She didn't know where to go from here. She didn't know what she wanted anymore. But as she stood there, facing Dominic, she knew one thing for sure. Her life had changed in ways she couldn't undo. She wasn't the same person who had walked into this mansion weeks ago. And whatever happened next, she was going to have to face it head on. The next few days felt like a haze for Emily. She spent most of her time alone in her room, trying to process the conversation she had with Dominic. His words echoed in her mind, like a constant reminder of her place in this world. She had become part of it, whether she wanted to or not. The reality of that truth weighed heavily on her. Every time she walked through the mansion, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that her every move was being scrutinized. The men who worked for Dominic followed her everywhere, always lurking in the background, ensuring she stayed in line. Dominic himself had been quiet lately, and Emily couldn't help but feel a strange sense of emptiness when he wasn't around. His presence was commanding, but there was also something about it that unsettled her. There were times when she found herself thinking about him more than she should, wondering if there was more to him than the Mafia boss persona he wore so well. But those thoughts made her nervous, made her question herself. She couldn't afford to get too close to him. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. One evening, as Emily wandered through the garden, she found herself standing in front of the large gate that marked the boundary of the estate. The cool night air filled her lungs, and for a moment, she felt a flicker of freedom. It was a fleeting thought, one she quickly pushed aside. There was no escape. She couldn't leave. She had no one left, no place to go. Her father's debts had bound her to Dominic, and she had nowhere else to turn. As she stood there, lost in thought, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to look to know it was him. She could feel his presence. Slowly, Dominic approached, his footsteps quiet but deliberate. He stopped beside her, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice calm but tinged with curiosity. Emily hesitated, unsure of how to respond. The truth was, she didn't know what she was thinking. She didn't know anything anymore. She had become so consumed by this world, by the life Dominic had forced on her, that she couldn't remember who she was before. "Just thinking," she replied softly, her gaze still fixed on the gate ahead of them. Dominic looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You've been distant," he said, his tone almost accusing. "I can't help it," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't my life. I don't belong here." Dominic's gaze softened just slightly, but there was still a coldness in his eyes. "You think you don't belong here?" he asked. "You're more a part of this world than you realize, Emily." She turned to face him, her eyes narrowing. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to be dragged into your world, to be treated like I'm just another piece in your game." Dominic's eyes darkened, and for a moment, Emily thought he might say something harsh, something to put her in her place. But instead, he simply looked at her, as if studying her. "I never asked you to be a part of it," he said quietly. "But you're here now, and you're not going anywhere." The finality in his words hit her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't going anywhere. She was trapped, whether she liked it or not. She had no choice but to live in this world. "You don't get to decide that," she said, her voice shaky but defiant. "I still have some say in what happens to me." Dominic's lips twitched into a faint, almost amused smile. "You think you do?" he said, stepping closer to her. "You think you have control over anything here? You're a part of this now, Emily. You always have been. You just haven't realized it yet." Emily wanted to argue, to fight back, but the words stuck in her throat. She had no response. Dominic was right. She had become part of this world, whether she liked it or not. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dominic's gaze softened, but there was still an undeniable edge to his tone. "I want you to stop fighting it," he said. "I want you to accept what's already been decided. You're here because you're meant to be here. You just don't see it yet." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't want to hear this. She didn't want to accept it. But deep down, she knew he was right. She had already been pulled into his world, and there was no escaping it now. She was stuck, and there was no way out. The realization hit her hard, like a wave crashing over her. She was a part of this world now, and there was nothing she could do to change that. "I'll never accept it," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Dominic didn't respond right away. He simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. And in that silence, Emily realized something. She had been fighting this world, fighting him, but maybe it was time to stop. Maybe it was time to stop running and face the reality of what her life had become. Maybe, for better or for worse, Dominic was right. She was here to stay.